So good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining Virginia Poverty Law Center's Coffee and Chat this morning. I just want to go over a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Emily and Joani. First, as you know, I am recording this coffee chat, and VPLC has a YouTube channel and where it will be posted later this afternoon. I'll send out a notification when it's posted in case you'd like to forward it on to others in your network that may find the information discussed this morning useful. I have heard that when a recording is recorded, that any comments in the chat are also viewable, so just be mindful of that. There will be time for Q&A at the end, and you can either use the raise hand function, which you can find underneath like reactions down at the bottom, at least on my computer, is a little raise hand function, or you can put your question in the chat and somebody will be monitoring that. I also am going to mute everyone, not because I don't want to hear your voice, but it will just be helpful as we move forward with background noise, etc. So when it comes time to ask your questions, just be mindful that you are muted and you'll need to unmute yourself. So enough from me. I do want to go ahead and take a moment and introduce Joani Latimer, who's the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman at the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, along with Emily Hardy, Virginia Poverty Law Center's elder law attorney, and the two of them will be hosting this morning. Take it away.
Thanks, Tony. Joani, just as a starting point, most people may be familiar, but can you tell us a little bit about what the Ombudsman program does here in Virginia?
Sure. So just to get us over the stumbling block of the name of the program, which might have been better considered, I think, but it's essentially a program that serves as an advocate for older persons and disabled individuals who rely on long-term care services. And it's, a federally mandated program. So every state has a state ombudsman program that covers the entire state geographically, and essentially the nuts and bolts of the program and what most individuals are familiar with the program is the work done through local representatives of the program around the state who investigate and resolve complaints on behalf of long-term care recipients. And I stress the on behalf of long-term care recipients because we are not an enforcement or a regulatory authority. We are there to stand with the resident to help empower them, help them exercise their rights and their voice, and most importantly, to resolve problems that they're having with their care and services. And the only other thing I would add to that is something somewhat unique to Virginia. The federal program calls for that advocacy in settings including nursing homes and assisted living facilities. But in Virginia, we also, like a number of other states, have extended that jurisdiction. So we actually do provide advocacy for individuals who are receiving home and community-based services as well.
And so within that, what are some of the common problems that the nursing home residents contact you about? Both, I would say, pre-COVID, and then has that shifted with this new world that we're all in at this point?
Sure. So I think over time, let's say pre-COVID, typically many of the issues that come to us are related to just basic care. I will say that it's been significant, I think, that ombudsman programs across the country have had a very high percentage of complaints dealing with improper transfer and discharge, an issue that I'm sure, Emily, you are very well familiar with. And it's an issue that our program has been fortunate to have a really strong partnership with Virginia Poverty Law Center and their elder law attorney in creating some systemic responses to that and trying to address something that's an ongoing issue. The caveat is that during COVID, we've seen somewhat less of that just because of some of the differences in rules and also some probably greater caution, I suppose, about transfer and inability to find places to transfer people to. So that if there's ever, a positive side, there might be that. But largely the issues that come to us relate to just basic care needs, whether people are getting, basic daily hygiene, bathing, assistance with dressing, assistance with going to the toilet. Frankly, hydration and nutrition is a huge issue. And I think that's a bit startling to a lot of us because we think that those things are so basic, of course they would occur, but those have been ongoing issues pre-COVID. I think other issues specifically related to COVID early on were things having to do with access to information for individuals, residents, and families. We really had to push, and we were fortunate to be able to work with fellow stakeholders in bringing to the administration the need to have some shift in our policies about what information about cases and deaths of residents in facilities due to COVID should be made public. So that's been an issue. Access to testing, which has been critical through all of this, access to basic PPE, and just, I think at the core of that, how much we are prioritizing those long-term care settings that have really been the crucible for the real, extreme degree of illness and death, frankly, from COVID. So those have been specific to COVID, but then I think in many ways what COVID has done, and I think this is not a surprise to a lot of us, is just expose the underlying fractures in the foundation of things. And at the heart of that has been really the issues that we've seen for many years and talked about for many years, and that we've had some legislators, thank you, who have brought, carried a banner to try to improve staffing, because that continues to be, for many, many reasons, an ongoing concern. So that itself is kind of the heart and core and really generates a lot of the issues and complaints that we're receiving.
Yeah, so thinking about kind of how this is a new time to look at nursing home issues, what are some of the ways, I know staffing came up already, but what are some other ways that we can look at trying to transform nursing homes in Virginia moving forwards with kind of the information we now have from COVID? Right.
Okay. Well, yes, we'll talk about staffing, and it's hard to almost put that off to the side even for a moment. But one of the issues that obviously has been critical to this whole era that we've lived through this year has been infection control, just basic training, preparation of staff, oversight and monitoring to make sure that the rules that are in place actually occur, and that they're not just on paper, they're not just policy, they're not just regulatory reference points, but that they are actually being carried out. And I think we certainly learned in the course of this that something as basic as hand washing isn't necessarily occurring. And we've seen many issues, I think, underlying some of the complications and the decline of residents over years that have, at the heart, they have to do with some of that failure to carry out those procedures properly. So, yeah, I think this has been a time where we really have, I have a hard time using opportunity because, you certainly can't put a positive spin on what we've seen, but it does invite us, I think, right now to just what the Brits have a term, you just have a think about something, which is, take it off, step away, think about something deeply and carefully. And this is, I think, what we're called upon to do right now, to look at the whole model that we've had in place and really think out of the box about what should compassionate care really look like? We have a system that, you know, is not by design so much as default. I think when nursing homes began to really prosper and grow, expand, and now, you know, to the point that we have mega corporate chains that are largely delivering our care. It wasn't based on something that we sat down and experts and persons with great insight and wisdom designed as a place where individuals would live out their final years. It was really a default based on, you know, well, a hospital looks like this, we'll do this. And here we are still kind of stuck in that model after all this time. And COVID in particular, as we know, has just absolutely brought to light some of the just basic inherent problems with that.
And I guess to jump back to staffing, like you said, it's hard to skip over it this year. This past session, there were 2 bills introduced, one in the Senate and one in the House, that both dealt with staffing ratios. Neither bill passed, but the concept behind them is something that CMS has put forth and that a lot of states have adopted. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about where the numbers came from and kind of what the purpose is of staffing ratios to protect residents.
Right. Well, I think the most important piece about the idea of staffing ratios to protect residents has to do with the fact that our federal rules, which come from, you know, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the overarching regs for the nursing home industry, don't really create a specific standard. I mean, those standards are couched in terms of adequate staff to meet residents' needs. Well, I think we can all imagine how vague and squishy that gets and how difficult it may be to enforce, because you're kind of forced to look at what happens on the bad end after the horse is out of the barn, if you will, rather than look up front to be able to measure whether staffing is adequate in place. So these bills have been, I think, what consumers and advocates for years have felt, you know, is the only way that we're going to be having any assurance that there are going to be just enough people on the floor on a given day to meet basic care needs of residents. So Delegate Watts on the House side has been carrying a staffing bill for many years, and it has continually sort of been a banner issue and an issue that dies, largely because of the fiscal impact as much as anything. And then Senator Kiggins has just been a great champion this year and over many sort of activities related to attention on this issue, and had brought her bill, which created specific staffing ratios in the sense of this number of residents to a direct care staff, this number of professional licensed nurses or RNs on staff on this shift on a given day. And I think the advantage of that approach probably is that that's a tangible and visible thing that consumers can understand and actually eyeball. Whereas I think many of the states and many of the advocates on the national level have rallied around also a sound approach, which is the number of staff hours per resident per day. So Delegate Watts has taken that approach and would have a gradual phase in of an increase in those hours per day over a period from now till 2030, at which point we would be at 4.1, which is kind of, you know, right there at the bead of what many advocacy groups say is the absolute basic essential staffing level. So we have been disappointed and certainly have just been, I think, very frustrated to see no action of all years this year with what we've seen and the tremendous difficulties that the staffing shortages have created. And of course, COVID has only exacerbated that with staff that have understandably decided this is it. You know, this is no longer for me. I'm not going back in, or have become ill, sadly themselves. And certainly we've had staff deaths as a result of COVID. So that has just all kind of layered on to a terrifically difficult crisis. I think it's important to say that, the industry will be the first to come back at the idea of staffing ratios with an argument that we don't have staff. There are not enough available to even hire. If you pass the standard, we can't meet it. And certainly there is a workforce shortage. There's no question about that. But I think advocates understand that it's probably as much about retention of staff, having a work situation that's a tenable one, that, it allows a person to do the work meaningfully, to get a living wage at doing it, to receive benefits, and frankly, as important even as all that, to be respected for the important work that they do, and the fact that they are the turning point for the quality of life for many residents. That relationship between a nursing assistant and the ability of that individual to take the time, to have the time to provide good care and to be in a caring relationship with the resident is what nursing facility care should be about. And that's what I think oftentimes we miss. So, looking at ways of recruiting additional individuals who might be interested in this work is a great idea, but you cannot expect that to fix the problem when the basic chassis of the thing is broken. In other words, the fact that the work situation and compensation and respect is what it is lacking, that is not going to keep people in that workforce for very long. So we're really chewing them up and spitting them out. So sorry, I went on a bit long there, but yeah, we know it's complicated, right, Emily?
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue. And just to reiterate, one of the reasons that we're looking at staffing ratios is because that shows the best patient outcomes. Having adequate staffing is what helps save lives and helps people stay and maintain their quality of care where they're at, so that they don't have worse outcomes and end up declining. So that's kind of the reason that's such an important piece of it. And then I know that Tony's probably almost ready for us to be done, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how people can help the Ombudsman program help residents, because I think there's a way for people to get involved if they're interested.
Right. Well, I think for one thing, starting point is just reaching out. I think oftentimes we run into real fear on the part of residents themselves and their families in terms of reaching out to an advocate, reaching out to an ombudsman, for fear that there will be retaliation, which we all know is absolutely forbidden under federal law. But we also all know that there's nobody there 24 hours a day in that setting. So I think that's the first step. Ombudsmen often work with families and the residents themselves, just helping them understand what their rights are. What does the law say? What's a reasonable expectation for how your care should go, and how much opportunity you should have to direct that care in the way that gives meaning to your life and that honors your choices. So I would say starting point is that. There are also opportunities, and we work with many families that try to get engaged in family councils, or work with residents, of course, involved with resident councils to help those individuals have a sort of a group force and not stand alone with their complaint, but in a united front, try to bring forth issues and get results. It's not to say that's an ideal solution. So, but it is something that we try to support whenever we can. And the opportunity, honestly, for individuals who want to make a difference to become volunteer ombudsman, to go through training and certification to do that. But I know we have at least a couple people probably on this call that have been a part of that at some point or another. And that is essential. I mean, we do not have nearly enough ombudsmen for all the problems that are out there. And we very much, rely upon extending that capacity through volunteers that are willing to give time and frankly, I think find tremendous meaning and often say, you know, they come back with so much more than they get from that they give to the situation. So we certainly welcome inquiries about that and would help anybody to try to find a spot.
Thank you, Joani and Emily. I am going to take it back if you don't mind, and that we have a couple of questions. Then I want to make sure that we get time for. A couple of them are in the chat, but I also received an email yesterday on two separate ones. The first question is, why doesn't the Commonwealth fine nursing homes like Medicare does when deficiencies are found? Why are the fines not higher? Giving nursing homes a slap on the wrist provides no real incentive to truly correct their behavior. And then there's a second part of basically why nursing homes are given a heads up when they're being inspected, and that this person is seeing nursing homes sprucing up when it's actually supposed to be a surprise inspection.
Sure. Well, just to take that in its parts, on the monetary penalty end of things, we do actually, whether that's an effective method of getting results or not, we do in Virginia, just looking at the records that the health department, which is the regulatory agency for nursing homes, puts out there. There are fines imposed, and I guess we could have a whole other program about why that maybe is not more effective at getting the changes that need to be made. Ours tend to be slightly higher than the average. I was surprised to learn. Actually, I hadn't looked at those in a while, and supposedly ours are, you know, on the high end. But as this questioner says, that is not necessarily making a difference. And we certainly, as advocates, run into situations where we are trying to use the threat of enforcement, not our enforcement, but, you know, our allies to that extent, to try to bring about some changes in the way the resident, for example, is handling an eviction of a resident. And oftentimes, you know, as is suggested here, a facility will decide, you know, we'll take it. We'll take the cite. We'll take the citation. We'll take the penalty. That's easier for us than doing the right thing and keeping this resident in place. So it's a tough issue. It is a tough issue. And I guess the other piece of that, in terms of the lack of surprise, this we need the Wizard of Oz to figure this out. But there is an absolute requirement that information about the date and the scheduling of a survey not be disclosed. In fact, we as ombudsman, you know, if we become privy to it somehow, we're, you know, banned by law from revealing that. But there is no question that we see the same thing. We see there's this ability to anticipate and this rhythm of surveys, let's say, and maybe it's just registration taking place at a hotel where somebody knows somebody, where the surveyors are in from out of town. Who knows? But we also see that things change the day of the survey, and that obviously is overcoming the whole idea of finding out what's going on in real time in that facility on an average day. So good question.
The other question is, how can we as individuals help with the staffing issues outside of becoming a volunteer ombudsman? How can we help you help our elected officials pass reform?
Right. Well, for sure, I think that our elected officials really understand the value of the consumer experience directly. I mean, they certainly are open to what we as advocates bring to them, but I think that family member from their community and their story with its specific details of what occurred for me are the things that drive change and that motivate, you know, individuals who came to office because they want to see things change. They want to improve what's broken. And this is certainly broken. So I would say absolutely reach out to your legislators. You can reach out to Virginia Poverty Law Center and the Ombudsman program to share stories or get connected with a network that can let you know when there's an opportunity, a hearing coming up, a bill coming before the chambers to make your story known, and then obviously to write to these individuals and keep it on the radar screen. I think one of the things that is the biggest problem for many of us that want to see a change in our long-term care is that our nursing homes they're out here and we're here, and for, you know, too often we just don't see day to day. We don't even want to see because we don't like that idea that we might at some point be infirm and need that kind of assistance. But they really become somewhat invisible, and what COVID did do, if anything, was to make those facilities and the problems that they're laden with visible to us. So I think keeping it there in front of those who would help us find ways to make some changes is so important.
I also want to acknowledge that we actually do have 2 elected officials with us this morning, at least that I see, is Delegate Carr and Senator Hashmi. And so I do want to thank you guys for coming and provide you space to say anything if you wish, but at the same time, do not want to put you on the spot.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Tony, to join this morning. And this has just been really, really helpful. Really appreciate Joani's comments and insights. And I am planning to continue to work on some legislation to address a lot of those serious issues that you've raised, and would love to continue the conversation after today. So thank you very much.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you. And it should be noted that Senator Hashmi was one of the co-sponsors of the Senator Giggins bill. So we so appreciate that support for that, and so grateful that you're in that camp of people that are looking at ways to improve things.
Thank you again. I'd like to second what Senator Hashmi said, and really appreciate being on this on the virtual coffee and all the work that you're doing. I remember sitting in that subcommittee appropriations meeting and voting for Delegate Watt's bill, and was so sorry about the outcome of that. No, I see Delegate Sickles coming on now. Remember the reaction, but we really do need to do something about this, and we'll continue to work with this to kind of better this situation, because it is it's not what our senior citizens should be experiencing in their golden years, as it were, and we need to do what we can to support our staff that are in this important area. But thank you all for your work. Thank you for being here. Thank everybody for participating this morning, and it incentivizes all of us to work for this as we move forward. Well, thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you for joining us, and welcome, Delegate Sickles. We do have several questions about the staffing. At the same time, there's one additional question about funding for the Long-Term Care Ombudsman office. And is it not well below the suggested level?
Right. So to take that one, we have what's a nationally recognized standard for the ombudsman program is 1 full-time ombudsman for every 2,000 long-term care beds. So we do not we've never come up to that in Virginia, though we do have it in code that as funds allow, that we will have that kind of coverage. So overall, we probably are half again as much, round about 1,000 to 3,000 or so. And what that doesn't take into consideration is the extended jurisdiction, which now, as we all know, fortunately, is expanding rapidly, the home and community-based long-term care services. So we're playing an active role in that. We do have some funding through DMAS for that piece of our work, but the traditional ombudsman facility-based, facility-oriented piece of things always has lagged. So we are constantly trying to shore that up, and you know, just like we want to see direct care assistants paid what they deserve for the valuable work they do, I think the same applies to the ombudsman program. So we very much appreciated. We've had some tremendous support from some of our legislators in trying to remedy that problem.
I will come back and say that our coffee chats are always scheduled from 9 to 9:30. And because we have just ticked past the 9:30 mark, I wanted to provide the opportunity for people to be blessed and released